Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents the Generalized Anxiety Disorder Workbook, a comprehensive CBT guide for coping with uncertainty, worry, and fear. By Melisa Robichaud, Ph.D., and Michael J. Dugas, Ph.D. Foreword by Martin M. Antony, Ph.D. Narrated by Hector Carrillo. Publisher's Note: the bonus content for this audiobook, including worksheets, worksheet examples, and figures, can be found at newharbinger.com/31519. Forward. It's an honor to contribute this foreword to the Generalized Anxiety Disorder Workbook. I treated my first client with Generalized Anxiety Disorder, or GAD, I'll call her Jackie, back in 1989, when I was still a graduate student. Jackie was not just the first person with GAD I had worked with, she was my first client ever. We used a combination of strategies designed to help Jackie challenge her anxiety-provoking thoughts and learn to relax, based on several early studies on the treatment of GAD. Despite my lack of experience, Jackie did well in therapy, experiencing a significant reduction in her worry. This opportunity to work with Jackie early in my career reinforced for me the value of changing the thoughts and behaviors that maintain problem worry in order to better manage anxiety, both Jackie's and that of her brand new therapist in training. Fast forward 26 years. Effective psychological treatments for GAD are now much better established. They are based on a more refined understanding of the nature of GAD and are supported by many well-controlled studies, including groundbreaking research by the authors of this book. However, what has remained missing all of these years is a step-by-step self-help workbook describing these proven strategies for overcoming GAD. There are a number of good evidence-based self-help books for dealing with other anxiety-based problems, and for dealing with anxiety in general, but not much for GAD in particular, until now. I've waited more than 25 years for this book. Melisa Robichaud and Michael Dugas have been studying GAD and its treatment for many years, and their treatment is among the best supported by research. A recent controlled study found that after receiving the treatment described in this workbook, 70% of participants with GAD no longer had GAD at the end of treatment. What's even more amazing is that a year later, 84% of participants no longer had GAD. In other words, people continued to improve in the months after treatment had ended. Likely a benefit of continuing to practice the strategies they learned while participating in the study. I get asked a lot, can listening to a self-help book really help me overcome my anxiety? My answer is always the same. No. No more than listening to a book on physical fitness will help you to get physically fit. To experience meaningful long-term change, it won't be enough to listen to this workbook. You'll need to practice consistently the strategies described in it. For some listeners, it will be possible to benefit from the treatment without the help of a therapist. For others, the support of a therapist will be important for reinforcing the strategies described in the book. Regardless of whether you decide to use this book on its own or in the context of therapy, I highly recommend it for anyone who is struggling with GAD. Best of luck as you begin your journey toward a life with less anxiety and worry. Martin M. Antony, Ph.D., ABPP, Professor, Department of Psychology, Ryerson University. Author, The Shyness and Social Anxiety Workbook and The Anti-Anxiety Workbook. Introduction. Given that you're listening to this book, you're probably someone who struggles with excessive worry and anxiety. You might even have been told by a health professional that you have generalized anxiety disorder, GAD. Or you might have come to this conclusion on your own, based on things you've read. If so, this book will help you better understand the problem and provide you with concrete strategies for dealing with it. The approach in this workbook is based on a psychological treatment called cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. A great deal of research has been conducted over the years investigating the effectiveness of CBT for the treatment of anxiety disorders. Overall, the research has shown that CBT is the most effective form of psychological treatment for most, if not all, anxiety disorders, as well as many other mental health problems. This means the suggestions provided throughout this workbook are evidence-based. Stated differently, the suggested strategies are not based on clinical intuition, what we think will work. They are based on science. As you listen through this workbook, you might find that some of the points discussed seem obvious or that some of the examples seem overly simplistic. However, this is the result of a deliberate decision on our part. Although most listeners will probably have GAD symptoms in common, everyone is nonetheless different. So you are listening to this book with your own unique knowledge. And, while you might be familiar with many of the concepts discussed, other listeners might not. Therefore, we start with the basics so that everyone who uses this workbook will have the same foundation. In addition, although some of the concepts are relatively straightforward and simple, it may be tricky to practice them in real life. Having a good understanding of the reasoning behind the strategies presented can help ensure that you apply them correctly. Therefore, we have also provided basic, clear, concrete examples such as fears of flying, getting lost, or going to parties. Your own worries and fears may be more complicated than the examples we provide. However, if you're confident in your understanding of these simple examples, you'll be better able to apply the strategies in this book to your particular worry and anxiety. How to use this workbook. The workbook includes several different strategies, sometimes spread out across multiple chapters. Each strategy is based on a different concept about how to understand and manage worry and GAD. We encourage you to take time to understand the logic behind each new idea. In addition, sometimes we'll ask you to monitor a specific type of thought or behavior prior to learning the strategies associated with a new idea. This monitoring is important, as it will give you a foundation of personal experience that will help you better understand the concepts presented. For each strategy, we include several exercises, and some of them require a week or two of practice. We strongly encourage you to take the time to master each one before moving on to the next strategy, even if this means you spend several weeks working on just one new approach. Plus, practice will increase your confidence, so feel free to stick with the same idea for as long as you need to. At the same time, if you feel that a concept or approach isn't a good match for you, you need not spend a great deal of time on it. Keep in mind that although some of the ideas in this book might not initially seem relevant to you, they could actually be helpful. So stick with all of the exercises for a while before deciding whether they are helpful or not. Many of the exercises and worksheets referenced are available for download so that you can use them repeatedly. We've indicated which are available in the text. To download them, visit newharbinger.com/31519. Working on your own versus with a therapist. You can work your way through this book on your own, or do the work in conjunction with a CBT therapist. However, if you choose to do this work on your own, we recommend that you try to stick to a regular schedule. Specifically, it would be a good idea to set aside a designated time each week to review the exercises you've been working on. At that time, you can decide whether you need to keep working on a particular skill or whether you're ready to move on to the next chapter. When we discuss this review with our clients, we refer to it as having a therapy session with yourself. So, pick a relatively regular time and place during your week, perhaps at your favorite coffee shop or at home at a time when you can be alone, and focus on yourself for a bit. Plan to give yourself 45 minutes to an hour. That will allow enough time for you to review the exercises you've been doing, plan new ones, and perhaps listen to a new chapter or section, or re-listen to a previous one. Why see a CBT therapist? There are many benefits to seeing a CBT therapist when you're working on managing your anxiety. First, a therapist can help with motivation and accountability. It can sometimes be a challenge to stick with new things, even if you have the best of intentions. For example, you might have gotten a gym membership in the past, only to go once or twice before eventually giving up. Building any new habit, including using CBT to work on your worries, requires you to stay motivated and follow through from week to week. Seeing a therapist can help with this, since you'll probably have regularly scheduled sessions during which you and your therapist will review and discuss any exercises you worked on over the past week. Because you know your therapist will ask how you did with the exercises, you may be more likely to follow through on them. In addition, if you're having difficulty staying motivated with CBT strategies, you can discuss this with your therapist, who will probably have some ideas about how you can address the issue. Another advantage of seeing a CBT therapist is that you get the benefit of the therapist's expertise in CBT. If you're struggling with a particular concept or are unsure how to complete an exercise, a therapist can help you troubleshoot the problem and brainstorm solutions. Moreover, because everyone with GAD has unique struggles with worry and anxiety, a CBT therapist can help you tailor the strategies in this book to your specific symptoms. In essence, your therapist can match the different ideas in therapy to your GAD fingerprint. When you should see a therapist. A good way to approach the CBT strategies described in this workbook is to think of them as the first element of a stepped care program. In a stepped care program, you begin by addressing problematic symptoms with a low-intensity treatment. Then, if the problem remains unmanageable, you move to a higher-intensity intervention. This workbook can be considered a low-intensity intervention. It's an ideal tool for people whose GAD symptoms are mild to moderate. In mental health, mild to moderate symptoms are those that are severe enough to be distressing to you and interfere with your quality of life, but moderate enough that you can still manage most of your daily activities and muster sufficient concentration to work through the steps in a workbook such as this one. If instead you feel very overwhelmed by any of the exercises in this workbook, or you're so anxious that you can't even concentrate enough to listen to some of the material, this is a sign that your GAD symptoms may be too severe for you to do this work by yourself. In this case, a high-intensity intervention might be more appropriate, and that would involve working with a CBT therapist. A therapist will not only help you work through the CBT strategies at your own pace, but will also provide support and encouragement throughout the process. Also, remember that it can be difficult to stay motivated when embarking on a new task. If you find that on several occasions you begin listening to this book and start on the work only to abandon it halfway through, you might benefit from working with a CBT therapist who can help you stick with it. All of that said, The ideas and exercises described in this book are, for the most part, relatively simple and straightforward. We believe that the vast majority of listeners will truly benefit from implementing the procedures we describe. Having worked with hundreds of clients with GAD over the past 2 decades, we are very pleased to be in a position to take what we've learned from them and offer it to a wider audience in the form of a workbook. We hope you'll enjoy our book, but most of all, we hope it will help you along the road to a life without GAD. Chapter 1: Worry, Anxiety, and GAD. In order to discuss how to deal with worry, anxiety, and GAD, we need to establish clear definitions of these terms. Most people tend to use the words worry and anxiety interchangeably, which can make it a challenge to differentiate between them in practical terms. To deal with a problem, you first have to be clear on exactly what the problem is. Understanding worry. Worry is a cognitive process. It occurs in the mind. Worry involves mentally anticipating and preparing for potential negative outcomes in the future. For example, let's say you take your car into the shop for a tune-up. You might think, what if there are major problems with the engine? It could be very expensive, and I might not be able to afford it. I could probably talk to the mechanic about a payment plan, but what if he doesn't accept? I could be without a car for a long time before I could pay for the repairs, and it might be difficult for me to get to work on time without a car. From this example, you can see that worry involves 2 components. One is thinking about negative things that could happen and their consequences. In this case, anticipating that your car might need major repairs, and that if you can't afford it, you'll have to figure out alternative transportation to work. The second is problem solving, or mental attempts to deal with these anticipated negative outcomes. Thinking about talking to the mechanic about a payment plan. Worry can, therefore, be thought of as mentally planning and preparing for the future, and building elaborate scenarios in an effort to predict what could happen and how you might deal with various situations. What if X happened? Well, then I might do this. But what if Y happened? Then I could do this. Although there are many different things that people can worry about, all worries tend to share certain characteristics. Worries typically start as what-if questions. This makes sense, given that when you worry, you're trying to mentally plan and prepare by thinking about possible outcomes of potential future situations. For example, if you're planning on taking a trip, you might think, what if it rains the whole time? This question then sets off worries. If it rains, I might not be able to do any of the activities I planned, and I'll have a terrible time. Perhaps I should also think about rainy day activities. But what if I can't come up with any fun activities for a rainy day? Worries are thoughts about the future. Even if you're thinking about a past event, when you're worrying, you're concerned about the event's future implications. For example, if you're worrying about an argument you had with a friend a week ago, you might be thinking, what if our friendship can never be repaired? This worry is focused on a possible future impact, the end of the friendship, resulting from a past event, the argument a week before. Worries are always negative. When you worry about potential future outcomes, you aren't concerned about positive things that could happen. What if I have a wonderful time on my vacation? Since they don't require any mental problem solving. Rather, your worries are focused on bad things that could happen. The content of worries, therefore, tends to be catastrophic, meaning you focus on the worst-case scenario even if you logically know that it's very unlikely. For instance, If you're worried about medical test results, you might fear that you have a serious disease, even if the tests are simply part of your annual checkup. What triggers worry? You might be wondering what triggers worry in the first place, particularly since it's possible to worry about many different types of things. Research has shown that what triggers worries is the experience of unpredictable, novel, or ambiguous events. In other words, you're more likely to worry when you're faced with a situation where the outcome is unclear, unpredictable, where the situation is completely new to you, novel, or where the situation itself isn't very well defined, ambiguous. In these types of situations, because there's some uncertainty about the outcome, there are many possibilities about what could happen, and you don't really know what will occur. Worry is, therefore, an attempt to think about all of these possibilities and mentally develop a plan beforehand. Let's consider an example for each of these uncertainty-inducing situations: unpredictable, novel, and ambiguous. Unpredictable situations. An example of an unpredictable situation might be preparing for a written exam. Since you don't know exactly what questions will be on the exam, the situation is unpredictable. Will the questions be difficult? Will you be anxious when you take the exam? Did you study the right material in order to answer the questions? There's no way to predict exactly what will be on the exam. In this case, your worries might be, what if I don't study enough for the exam? I could study extra hours every day, but what if I forget something important and it's on the exam? What if I don't understand the questions? I could fail the class. Another example of an unpredictable situation is going for a job interview. No matter how much you prepare, you don't know what your potential employer will ask during the interview. As such, you're more likely to worry. What if she doesn't like me? What if she asks me a question that I don't answer well? I might not get hired. Novel situations. A novel situation is any situation that you've never been in before. This can include trying an exercise class you've never taken before, starting a new job, or traveling somewhere you've never been. If, for example, you've never tried sushi and friends invite you to dinner at a sushi restaurant, the novelty of the situation can trigger worries. What if I don't like sushi? I could end up paying for a meal that I don't eat and then have to get dinner elsewhere. Maybe I could ask the waiter for something simple that someone who's never had sushi might like. But what if I don't like anything in the restaurant? In addition to being hungry, I could be embarrassed in front of my friends. Going to college for the first time is another example of situation that's novel and may therefore trigger worries. What if I get lost when I get there? What if I can't find my class? I could walk in late and embarrass myself. I could get there early to make sure that I find my class and make it on time. But what if the classrooms are so large that I'm overwhelmed by the number of people? Ambiguous situations. An ambiguous situation is one where it's unclear whether something positive, negative, or neutral could happen. For example, if your boss tells you that he wants to meet with you, this is an ambiguous situation because you don't know why he's asked to speak with you. It could be to tell you that you got a raise, positive outcome. To tell you what tasks you need to complete that day, neutral outcome. Or to reprimand you for not doing a certain task correctly, negative outcome. Because the situation is ambiguous and you don't know what to expect, you're more likely to worry. What if he wants to see me because I did something wrong? He could fire me. I could tell him that I'll work harder and not make any more mistakes. But what if he disregards what I say and fires me anyway? Another example would be leaving a phone message for a friend and not hearing back from him. Why didn't he contact you? Perhaps he didn't receive the message. Or maybe he called you back and you somehow didn't get the message. However, it's also possible that he doesn't want to speak to you, is angry with you for some reason, is overwhelmed with some sort of life problem, or is simply very busy. Because you don't know why your friend didn't return your call, this is an ambiguous situation that's likely to lead to worry. What if he didn't get my message? Perhaps I can phone him again and leave another message. But what if he hasn't contacted me because he's very busy right now, and he gets upset that I keep calling? What if he's angry with me and yells at me when I call? When is worry a problem? It's important to remember that everyone worries on occasion, and this is absolutely normal. For instance, we all tend to worry more during times of stress or major life changes. You might find that you're more likely to worry when you have an increase in work responsibilities, during exams, when someone in your family is ill, or when there's a significant event in your life, such as moving to a new home or getting married. In addition, most people sometimes worry when faced with unpredictable, novel, or ambiguous situations. The fact that you worry isn't evidence that there's a problem. So when does worry become a problem? In the field of mental health, we consider worry to be problematic when it is present most every day, is excessive given the situation, is difficult to control, and interferes with a person's daily life or leads to significant distress. If, for example, you worry about an upcoming exam so much that you can't concentrate on studying, or you're so worried about a job interview that you cancel the interview altogether, it's likely that you have problematic worry. A reduction in quality of life can also signal a problem with worry. You might find that it's hard to enjoy the time you spend with loved ones because you're so preoccupied with worries. Or you might find yourself avoiding pleasant activities because you don't want to worry about them beforehand. For example, some people report being so worried about the health and well-being of their children that even when they're playing with their kids, they're focused on their worries rather than on having fun. Exercise 1.1. Assessing whether your worry is problematic. As with most symptoms in mental health, problematic worry is a matter of degree. It isn't just the act or presence of worry that indicates a problem, but rather the frequency, severity, excessiveness, and uncontrollability of worry. The following quiz will help you determine whether your worries are problematic. Note each statement that generally reflects your experience with worry. I worry most days. I worry even when everything is okay. An example would be worrying about your health even when there's nothing wrong. I worry too much about small problems. An example would be worrying a lot about being on time for appointments. My worry is excessive. In my opinion, I worry more than I should. Other people tell me that I worry too much. My worry is hard to control. Once I start worrying, it's hard to stop, even if I try. If you agreed with at least 3 of the statements, worry might be a problem for you. Understanding anxiety. Whereas worries take place in the mind, anxiety occurs in the body. Anxiety is a general name for a varied number of physical sensations that people experience when they're in danger or feel threatened in some way. Anxiety sensations can include a racing heart, changes in breathing, stomach problems, ranging from butterflies in the stomach to nausea or diarrhea, sweating, trembling or shaking, hot flushes or cold chills,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?